Imagine an island that, that loses nearly 80% of its ancient emerald forests in just a few decades.
Yeah, just completely wiped out to feed this massive commercial empire.
Right. Only for that same island to turn around and orchestrate like one of the most successful nationwide ecological resurrections in modern history.
It's just a profound whiplash of a timeline, honestly. You're looking at a geography that went from a pristine evolutionary vault down to an absolute ecological disaster and then somehow clawed its way back.
And it was a deeply conscious systemic recovery, too. So welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are looking at Cuba.
But, we're setting aside the usual stuff, the borders, the treaties, the political entities.
Exactly. Instead, we're looking at the topsoil, the wetlands, the native palms. We're exploring how a nation's biodiversity essentially became the physical ground of its identity for the people there.
And before we jump in, we should establish some boundaries for you, the listener, because we are looking at a very specific historical window today.
Right, the temporal boundary, all the data, the ecological analysis, the forest coverage stats we'll be discussing, all of that strictly concludes at the year 2012.
Yeah, 2012 is our hard stop. It serves as this pristine snapshot of a very specific era of environmental reckoning. We aren't extrapolating past that.
And I also want to pull back the curtain a bit on how we actually built the timeline for today's discussion. Because we used artificial intelligence to process centuries of ecological records.
Which is incredibly helpful. It's what we like to call an exoskeleton for data.
An exoskeleton, yeah, I love that term. Because AI is incredible at mapping out deforestation percentages or, organizing these complex historical turning points.
Right, it gives us the structure, but, and this is a big but that data exoskeleton lacks a conscience.
Exactly.
I mean, it can pinpoint exactly when a forest was clear-cut, but the AI doesn't care if that forest ever grows back.
Doesn't have a stake in it.
No, not at all. And that brings up the fundamental theme of our exploration today. True environmental stewardship requires the muscle inside that exoskeleton.
The human element.
Yeah, the human observation. It requires ethical commitment, physical labor. An AI can organize the timeline of damage, sure, but protecting a natural sanctuary is a fundamentally human responsibility.
Data observes, humanity acts.
Exactly. Data observes, humanity acts.
So to really grasp the scale of the action they had to take, we have to understand the baseline, like what was actually at stake here.
Well, we're talking about an archipelago of over 42,000 square miles. That's the main island, the Isle of Youth, and more than 1,600 small isles and keys.
And despite being historically subjected to, heavy galleon traffic and centuries of colonization as the key to the New World, it holds the absolute highest biodiversity of all the islands in the Americas.
The concentration of unique life there is just staggering. I mean, to give you a sense of it, 51% of its vascular plants are native.
Wait, let's define that quickly.
Yeah.
Because vascular plants is a term we see thrown around a lot in these ecological surveys, and I want to make sure we're all on the same page.
Oh, sure.
We're talking about plants that have specialized tissue to transport water and minerals.
Right.
Right? The complex, tall flora. Ferns, conifers, flowering plants.
Precisely, yeah. It holds the first place in the Antilles for tall trees, and that includes 100 different species of native palms.
100? That's wild.
Yeah, and when you look at the fauna, over 80% of its native land invertebrates, especially mollusks, are found absolutely nowhere else on Earth.
Nowhere else. And that extreme localization, that's due to, what's it called? Endemism.
Endemism, yes.
So how does that mechanism actually work on the ground? Why are the mollusks there so vastly different from an island just, a few hundred miles away?
Well, it comes down to evolutionary isolation. The geography of the island features these highly isolated mountain ranges. You have the Sierra Maestra, Guamajaya, Guanaguanico,
Okay.
and these ranges are separated by expansive flat plains, and then the whole thing is surrounded by incredibly well-preserved coral reefs.
So they're kind of boxed in.
Right. When a species of plant, or say a snail, is isolated in one of these highly specialized, protected microclimates over millennia, it evolves unique traits. Traits adapted perfectly to that specific valley or ridge.
Wow.
Yeah, they become entirely endemic to that one exact spot.
It is essentially a biological vault, like an evolutionary fortress.
That's a great way to put it.
And there is a detail in our data that is just, brilliantly ironic to me. There are 0 animals on the island considered a danger to humans,
Right, the apex predators are practically non-existent.
which is great for people, but because of that, it became an absolutely vital refuge for North American birds.
Yes, there are 350 bird species reported there.
And many of them actively migrated down to escape the destruction of their own habitats back in North America.
Exactly. They found a sanctuary, a literal safe haven for biodiversity that was being pushed out of the continent.
So, okay, we have this pristine biological fortress, but if it was a fortress, how did the walls come down? Because, I mean, they did come down, and rapidly.
They fell to the commodification of the landscape.
Right.
And the chronology of this ecological retreat is one of the sharpest declines you will see in any historical data set.
It's honestly shocking.
It is. In 1511, when Spanish colonization began, 95% of the soil was covered by thick, ancient forests.
95%.
Yeah. We were talking about massive canopies of cedar, mahogany, ebony, and 300 years later, in 1812, the forest cover was still at 89%.
Which makes sense, right. For 3 centuries, extraction was largely limited to cutting precious woods for shipbuilding.
Right, it was a footprint, sure, but a relatively manageable one for a robust ecosystem to just kind of absorb and recover from.
But then the agrarian economy shifted.
It shifted entirely. They started focusing on a monoculture crop, which was sugar.
Sugar.
Yeah. And by 1900, the forest cover drops to 54%.
Wow.
And by 1959, it plummets to a critical barren 14%.
Okay, wait, I want you to think about that math for a second because it's crazy. It took 300 years to lose 6% of the forests,
Right.
but it took just 60 years in the 20th century to wipe out 40%. I mean, I understand the industry expands, but how do you physically wipe out almost half an island's forests in 6 decades?
It takes a massive, almost intentional level of destruction.
Yeah. Like, how does that even happen logistically?
Well, it was structurally embedded into how the land was managed. By the 1950s, the island had become a land of latifundia.
Latifundia, those are the massive privately owned estates, right?
Exactly. These sprawling, privately owned estates. In fact, 87% of the national farm area was comprised of these large sugar and cattle holdings.
87%. That is a massive monopoly on the land.
It is. And the sugar industry operates with an insatiable appetite for 2 very specific things: virgin soil and immense thermal energy.
Right, because sugarcane depletes the soil incredibly fast if you don't rotate crops.
Precisely. So rather than restoring the soil, these massive estates would just clear cut and burn adjacent virgin forests so they could plant more cane.
Just burning it down to move a few miles over.
Yeah. And the wood from those clear-cut ancient forests wasn't even being sold as timber. The sugar mills required tremendous heat to boil the sugarcane juice down into crystallized sugar.
Oh, no. So they were
literally shoveling ancient mahogany and cedar into furnaces just to fuel the commercial sugar production.
burning a biological volt to boil sugar water. That's hard to hear.
It is a devastating reality. The environment wasn't viewed as a sanctuary. It was viewed purely as an inexhaustible commercial resource or, simply an obstacle to expanding the fields.
And the cost of treating it that way was catastrophic.
Completely. When you clear-cut a tropical forest, the root systems that hold the earth together rot away.
Right. They anchor everything.
Yeah, so without them, the heavy tropical rains just wash the topsoil directly into the rivers and out to sea. Our data shows that 76% of the agricultural soil suffered severe erosion.
76%. And the biological cost was even steeper, wasn't it?
Yeah. 14,000 identified species went extinct during this era.
14,000.
That is 10% of the Cuban fauna just permanently deleted from the earth.
They really hit rock bottom. I mean, 14% forest cover is an ecosystem on the absolute brink of total collapse.
It really is.
So you hit 14%, the soil is eroding, the ancient woods are burned to ash, the rivers are choking on industrial waste. How do you physically reverse that?
Right, because a crisis of that magnitude forces a profoundly difficult sociological awakening. You can't just ignore it anymore.
Exactly.
It triggered a collective shift toward ethical stewardship that researchers often refer to as a green crusade.
A green crusade, I like that.
Post-1959, the nation began a massive objective overhaul of how it interacted with the biosphere.
And again, to give you, our listener, a clear boundary on the data we are exploring today, we're tracking this recovery strictly up to the year 2012.
Right. Our analysis serves as a pristine snapshot of this specific era of environmental reckoning.
And by that 2012 benchmark, They had achieved an annual forest increase of 0.18% over the preceding decades.
Which brought the forest cover back up to 21.3%.
That is nearly 6 million acres of forest painstakingly restored. But here is where I'm a little skeptical.
Okay.
Governments pass flowery environmental laws all the time. A piece of paper in a legislative building doesn't stop a bulldozer in a forest.
Fair point.
What was the actual mechanism that allowed this recovery to work? Not just on paper, but in reality.
The mechanism was a fundamental redefinition of the land itself. It was codified heavily in 1997 with the passing of Law 81.
Law 81. What did that do?
Well, it wasn't just a standard regulatory bill. Article 2 of that law explicitly declared that the environment is a fundamental patrimony and interest of the nation.
Patrimony. Meaning like an inheritance.
Yes. And this is the narrative pillar of this entire ecological shift. By legally classifying the environment as national patrimony, the state redefined the ecosystem from a commercial commodity into a defensive sanctuary.
So it's no longer just property to be bought and burned.
Exactly. The native palms, the topsoil, the rivers, they were legally recognized as the intrinsic property of the citizenry and, most importantly, of future generations.
Wow. So it was a conscious act of reclaiming the land's original sovereignty.
Yes.
So destroying a wetland isn't just an environmental code violation anymore. It's treated as destroying a piece of the nation's identity itself.
Precisely. If you accept that the survival of the biosphere is an act of national solidarity, the policies change from merely managing extraction to actively healing the system.
Okay, the philosophy makes total sense, but I want to get into the dirt here. What does this Green Crusade actually look like on the ground?
Let's look at the Ciénaga de Zapata, down in the south of the Matanzas province. It is the largest and best preserved marsh in the entire Caribbean basin. We're talking over 1,700 square miles of forests, mangroves, and coastal vegetation.
That's huge.
It's massive. And it's home to over 900 plant species, 172 types of birds, 31 reptiles, and 12 mammal species.
But, a marsh isn't just an outdoor zoo. Why dedicate so many resources to protecting a massive swamp?
Because biologically, a marsh is an incredible piece of natural infrastructure.
See, infrastructure, how so?
Well, it acts as a massive filtration system, for one. It cleans fresh water before it hits the ocean. It also serves as a vital buffer against hurricanes, absorbing storm surges that would otherwise decimate inland populations.
Oh, that makes sense.
And it is a deep carbon sink. So protecting it required immense human intervention. They had to strictly enforce bans on logging and actively monitor wildlife populations across hundreds of miles.
So they protected the pristine areas. But preserving a relatively untouched marsh is one thing. Restoring an actively collapsing, highly contaminated area is a much harder problem.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's talk about Havana Bay, because this is where the scale of human effort becomes incredibly clear to me.
Havana Bay is a perfect case study. It was effectively a dumping ground for centuries.
Yeah, in our data timeline, authorities identified 208 distinct sources of contamination pouring directly into the bay.
208 industrial and municipal sites just treating the bay like an open sewer.
And this is where we have to talk about the physical mechanism of the cleanup. How do you actually fix 208 points of contamination?
It's not easy.
You can't just plug the pipes, right? Those factories and municipal centers still have waste they have to put somewhere.
Right, you have to redesign the systemic plumbing of the entire society. So they systematically targeted these sources. Many of these sites were producing organic industrial waste like sludge from food processing or agricultural runoff.
Yeah.
When that organic matter dumps into a bay, it causes massive algae blooms, and those blooms suck all the oxygen out of the water, which suffocates the marine life.
It creates a dead zone.
Exactly. So instead of dumping it, they intercepted it.
How?
They built treatment facilities to process that organic sludge, compost it, and turn it into nutrient-rich fertilizer.
No way.
Yeah. By the early 2000s, they were taking 84% of this industrial waste and repurposing it for agriculture.
Wait. So they took the exact sludge that was choking the bay, processed it, and routed it back to fix the 76% eroded agricultural soil we talked about earlier.
Yes. It is a brilliant closed-loop system. They eliminated dozens of the contamination sources completely, and well over 100 were put in the process of being systematically resolved.
That is incredible.
And over in Cienfuegos Bay, there was a similarly intense effort targeting 47 polluting factories. It led to the water clearing up so significantly that the highly sensitive white shrimp actually returned to the bay.
And this perfectly illustrates what we talked about at the top of the show with the exoskeleton. Our AI data exoskeleton could instantly flag those 208 contamination points in Havana Bay.
Right, it can give you a nice spreadsheet of the oxygen levels.
But an AI cannot redesign a factory's waste management system. It takes human ethical commitment and immense physical labor to actually process that sludge and route it to a farm.
Exactly. The human conscience is the muscle that executes the change.
That same human muscle was applied to the Colorado River Basin too, wasn't it?
Yes, a massive recovery project covering nearly 3,500 square miles. And it wasn't just about saving a river, it was about integrating reforestation, stabilizing the soil, and securing a clean water supply for 1 million people living in that basin.
Which brings up a huge logistical question for me.
What's that?
If you are protecting the forests and you're cleaning the bays and shifting to this massive closed-loop conservation model, how are you powering the society?
The energy question.
Yeah. A population still needs electricity. They need fuel.
Ugh.
And Cuba does not have massive coal deposits or sprawling hydrocarbon reserves. So if they aren't clear-cutting trees for fuel anymore, how do they keep the lights on without reversing all this environmental progress?
They turned to the very thing that caused the problem in the first place, sugar.
Sugar.
But they adapted it. Because they lacked abundant fossil fuels, they turned to renewable biomass, specifically the combustion of sugarcane pulp, which is known as bagasse.
Wait, I need you to explain the mechanism here. Because if you are burning sugarcane pulp, you are still burning carbon.
Right.
How does burning massive amounts of agricultural waste not just create another massive air pollution problem? You're trying to save the environment, but you're running furnaces.
It's a crucial distinction, and the answer lies in the carbon cycle.
Okay.
See, when you dig up coal or oil, you are taking carbon that has been trapped underground for millions of years, and you're releasing it into the modern atmosphere. That adds to the total carbon load.
Right. It's new carbon entering the current system.
Exactly. But sugarcane is a fast-growing crop. The carbon released when you burn the bagasse is the exact same carbon the plant absorbed from the atmosphere while it was growing just months prior.
So it is a relatively carbon-neutral loop.
Exactly. It's called cogeneration. The sugar mills squeeze the juice from the cane, and then the leftover fibrous pulp is fed directly into highly efficient boilers on site.
So they power themselves.
Not just themselves. The high-pressure steam powers turbines, which run the mill, yes, but they also feed excess electricity back into the national grid.
That's amazing.
By the mid-1990s, the combustion of sugarcane pulp accounted for nearly 25% of the total basic energy produced on the island.
That is an incredible historical irony. The sugar industry, the same economic engine that clear-cut the mahogany, burned the ancient forests to boil cane juice, and decimated the island down to 14% forest cover. That same industry was eventually repurposed to run on its own waste.
It became a vital tool to reduce reliance on contaminating fossil fuels and protect the remaining ecosystem.
It's a remarkable pivot. But, engineering a nationwide closed-loop biomass system doesn't happen by accident.
No, it requires a massive infrastructure of knowledge. If you are going to weave environmentalism into the fabric of your society, you have to start with education and rigorous science.
And the data shows they committed hard to that infrastructure.
They really did.
Environmental education was integrated directly into the national school system starting in the 1970s. From the primary grades onward, they trained a generation of citizens to be fundamentally mindful of their surroundings.
And they backed that cultural education with serious scientific funding. By the late 1990s, they were dedicating 1.2% of their gross national product strictly to research.
They established 222 research and development centers across the country.
And they weren't just researching abstract theories. They mapped the entire nation's soil on a scale of 1 to 25,000.
Wait, the whole nation?
Yes. So they knew exactly what nutrients were missing where. They pioneered biological agents for agricultural plague control so they could stop drenching the recovered soil in harsh chemical pesticides.
They really treated it systemically.
And perhaps most impressively, they created extensive germplasm banks to protect plant genetics.
Break down what a germplasm bank is for those who might be unfamiliar.
Sure. Think of it as a biological backup drive.
I like that.
It is a secure facility that freezes and preserves the seeds, tissues, and genetic material of plants. So, If a highly endemic species of palm tree in the Sierra Maestra gets entirely wiped out by a severe hurricane,
You haven't lost its genetics forever.
exactly, you have the biological blueprint safely stored, and you can actively reintroduce it to the ecosystem.
They literally treated the environment like the most complex, valuable piece of infrastructure the nation possessed.
Because, as Law 81 stated, it is their patrimony. They recognize that an environmental crisis can only be faced by a social organization that is rational, respectful of the physical world, and treats the ecosystem as a shared responsibility.
So let's trace the full arc of the journey we've explored today. We started with an island that was a biological fortress,
Right, a sanctuary with 95% forest cover.
harboring highly endemic species found nowhere else, acting as a refuge for millions of migrating birds.
And then we watched that sanctuary get methodically dismantled by the aggressive expansion of latifundia and the early sugar industry.
We saw it stripped down to a barren 14% forest cover. It suffered severe soil erosion and the tragic extinction of a tenth of its fauna.
But then we saw the pivot, the sociological awakening.
The Green Crusade. We saw a nation pass legislation redefining its land, not as a commodity, but as a sovereign inheritance.
We saw human labor turn industrial waste in Havana Bay into agricultural fertilizer.
We saw them repurpose the destructive sugar industry into a closed-loop biomass energy grid. And we saw them climb from that 14% low back past 21.3% forest cover by our 2012 boundary.
And the ultimate takeaway here brings us right back to our original premise. The data, the AI, the exoskeletons of technology, they can measure the parts per million of contaminants in a bay, and they can chart the timeline of a forest decline.
But the actual recovery of a national sanctuary relies entirely on human friction.
It relies on an ethical responsibility to future generations. The muscle of stewardship is what enacts the change.
Data observes, humanity acts. It leaves us with such a powerful reframing of what a nation actually is, beneath the politics and the borders. So I want to leave you, our listener, with a final concept to mull over as you go about your day. If a country decides that its true wealth and identity aren't measured by its industrial output or its stock market, but are intrinsically tied to the health of its topsoil, the vibrancy of its native trees, and the purity of its wetlands, tied to the purity of its wetlands, how does that redefine what it actually means to be a patriot in your own community? Think about that. Until next time.